Okay, so you want to really understand procurement.
Yeah.
And you've given us the PMBI guide
Right.
and a few things about actual practices. So
Uh-huh.
we're going to kind of like break down how that works in project management, right? Hit those key principles and processes.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that the PMBI guide, it actually lays out 23 principles
Okay,
for project management overall.
okay.
And we can see how a lot of those apply directly to procurement.
I like that. So instead of it being like its own separate thing,
Right.
we're going to kind of weave it into how projects actually run.
Exactly. And I think it'll help you understand not just what to do, but
Right.
like why you're doing it that way.
Yeah.
You know, for example, one of the principles is all about tailoring your approach. So there's no one-size-fits-all method for procurement.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the specific needs of each project and then adjusting your strategy accordingly.
So it's like having a toolkit of all these different tools and techniques, and you use the best one that fits that particular project.
Precisely. Another key principle is stewardship,
Okay,
which really emphasizes ethical and responsible decision-making.
that's a big one,
Yeah,
especially when you're dealing with contracts and money and, all these stakeholders.
absolutely. It's about being transparent, fair, and making decisions that are in the best interests of the project and the organization.
Not for your own personal gain.
Exactly.
Got it. So we've got this foundation of project management principles.
Right.
How does procurement actually fit into the whole project lifecycle?
Well, the PMBO guide outlines a clear procurement process,
Okay.
which we can think of as a series of steps that guide you from identifying your needs to closing out the contract.
Right.
And it all starts with planning.
Okay.
This is where we determine what needs to be procured
Right.
and how we're going to go about it.
Okay.
This is formally called plan procurement management.
So before we even think about contacting vendors or anything, we need to have a plan.
Yes.
What kind of things are we figuring out at this stage?
So you're going to define your requirements,
Okay.
exactly what goods or services you need, the quantity, the quality standards, the delivery timeline.
Uh-huh.
It's also about understanding your budget, the available resources, and any potential risks involved.
So you don't want to start shopping without knowing how much money you have or what kind of roadblocks you might run into.
Exactly. And this is where another project management principle comes in. Focus on value.
Okay.
We're not just buying things for the sake of it.
Right.
Every procurement decision should be driven by the value that it brings to the project.
So you're getting the best bang for your buck.
Yes.
And making sure it actually aligns with your goals and objectives.
Precisely. So this planning stage is really about laying a solid foundation
Okay.
for the rest of the procurement process.
So we've got our plan in place. Now what?
Next comes the exciting part, conducting the procurement.
Okay.
This is where we actually go out and find potential vendors, send out big documents,
Okay.
evaluate their proposals, and ultimately select the winner.
So it's like a competition.
Exactly. And this is where the principle of teamwork really comes into play.
Okay.
Successful procurement often involves a cross-functional team
Yeah.
with expertise in areas like procurement, legal, technical, and finance, all working together.
So it's not just a procurement team, but it's all these other people.
Right.
Making sure they get the best decision for the project.
Precisely. Now, once we've selected our vendor,
Okay.
the focus shifts to controlling the procurement.
Okay, so this is about making sure the vendor does what they said they were going to do.
Exactly.
Stay on schedule and within budget.
Exactly. It's about managing the contract, monitoring performance,
Okay.
addressing any issues that arise, and ensuring that we get what we paid for.
So planning, conducting, and controlling, that's the basic framework.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, woven into these processes is something called the procurement management plan.
I was just going to ask you about that. What is the procurement management plan?
Okay.
And how's that different from just like the project plan?
Think of it as a roadmap.
Okay.
Specifically for procurement,
Okay.
it takes those high-level plans
Right.
and translates them into specific procurement actions.
Oh.
So it includes things like how procurement activities will be coordinated with other project elements, like the schedule and the budget,
Right.
the specific procurement methods we'll use, the roles and responsibilities of everyone involved,
Okay.
and how we'll measure success.
So it's a more detailed, like actionable plan
Exactly.
for that whole procurement journey.
Exact. And it's not just a static document.
Right.
It's a living document that can be updated as the project evolves and new information becomes available.
So flexibility is key, right?
Yeah.
Especially in today's world where things change so quickly.
Yes.
Speaking of flexibility, let's talk about contract types.
Okay.
I know from the PMBI guide there are all these different contract types,
Right.
and choosing the right one is crucial, right?
Absolutely. Different projects have different needs and risk profiles,
Yeah.
so it's important to choose a contract type that aligns with those factors.
Okay.
So one common type is a fixed price contract,
Right.
where the price is set up front
Right.
and doesn't change,
Okay.
regardless of the actual costs incurred by the seller.
So that's good for the buyer
Yeah,
because they know what they're paying,
right.
but it puts more risk on the seller.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Fixed price contracts work best when the scope of work is very well defined
Okay.
and there's minimal uncertainty.
Gotcha.
Another type is a cost reimbursable contract,
Okay.
where the buyer agrees to reimburse the seller
Right.
for their allowable costs plus a fee.
So then that would put more risk on the buyer.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Cost reimbursable contracts are more suitable for projects where the scope of work is less defined
Right.
or where there's a higher degree of uncertainty.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So choosing the right contract type is really important, understanding, the
Yeah.
needs of the project and the risk tolerance.
Exactly.
But regardless of what type of contract it is, we need to document everything carefully.
Absolutely. The PMB guide emphasizes clear and concise documentation
Yeah,
throughout the entire procurement process.
right,
This not only helps prevent misunderstandings and disputes,
right.
but also ensures that we have a clear record of decisions made
Right.
and actions taken.
And that's super important when you're talking about contracts and money.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And speaking of documentation,
yes.
let's dive into the different types of procurement documents
Okay, let's
that
do
you'll
that.
encounter on your journey.
Sounds good to me. Okay, so let's talk about these procurement documents.
Okay.
I imagine there's a lot of paperwork involved in this process.
There is, but remember that principle of transparency we talked about? Clear documentation is a big part of that.
Yeah,
Keeps everyone on the same page, and it helps build trust.
that makes sense. So what kind of documents are we talking about?
Well, it starts with the procurement management plan,
Okay.
which we already discussed. That's like your overarching guide.
Right.
But then we have things like bid documents.
Okay.
These are used to solicit proposals from potential vendors.
Okay.
These documents outline the project scope, the specific requirements for the goods or services being procured,
Okay.
and the criteria that will be used to evaluate the bids.
So it's kind of like a detailed shopping list that
Exactly.
you're sending out to everyone and saying, this is what we're looking for. This is how we're going to make our decision.
Exactly. Then, in response to those bid documents, the vendors will submit their proposals.
Okay.
And those proposals outline, their proposed solution, their pricing, their qualifications.
It's their chance to pitch their services and show why they're the best.
Precisely. Evaluating these proposals is a critical step in the procurement process.
Yeah.
We need to make sure we're comparing apple to apples
Right.
and making a decision based on the criteria we established in the bid documents.
And not just price,
Right.
but, the experience of the vendor and their track record.
Absolutely.
And if they can actually deliver on what they're saying they can do.
Absolutely. And this is where another project management principle comes into play. Focus on outcomes.
Okay.
We're not just looking for the lowest price.
Right.
We're looking for the solution that will best help us achieve our project goals.
So the one that fits our needs the best.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've picked a vendor. Now what?
Then we move on to the contract.
Okay.
This is the legally binding agreement between the buyer and the seller
Right.
that outlines the terms and conditions of the procurement.
Okay.
It includes things like the scope of work, the payment terms, the delivery schedule, and the performance standards.
So this is where it all becomes official.
Exactly.
And legal.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that a contract is a two-way street.
Right.
It protects both the buyer and the seller, outlining the rights and obligations of each party.
Okay, so we've got our plan, we've got our bids, we've got our proposals, we've got our contract.
Right.
It sounds like a lot of people involved in this process.
It is.
So who are the key players? Who does what?
Well, it starts with the buyer,
Okay.
which is the organization or individual who's procuring the goods or services.
Right.
They're responsible for defining the requirements, managing the budget, and making the final decision on which vendor to select.
So they're the ones calling the shots.
Exactly.
Okay.
Then we have the seller,
Right.
which is the organization or individual who's providing the goods or services.
Yeah.
Their role is to understand the buyer's requirements, submit a competitive proposal, and deliver on their promises.
So they're the ones who have to,
Yes.
really step up and, show that they can do it.
Precisely. And then we have the project manager,
Okay.
who plays a crucial role in ensuring that procurement aligns with the overall project goals and constraints.
Right.
They're responsible for coordinating with the procurement team, managing the budget, and ensuring that the procured goods or services are delivered on time and within budget.
Like the conductor.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then often there's a dedicated procurement administrator,
Uh-huh.
a team who handles the day-to-day tasks of the procurement process,
Yeah.
like, preparing bid documents, evaluating proposals, managing contracts,
So
contracts.
kind of the behind the scenes, making
Sure.
sure everything runs smoothly.
Absolutely. Now, it's important to remember that everyone involved in the procurement process
Right.
has a responsibility to act ethically and legally.
Right. We can't just like get the best deal. We got to do it the right way.
Exactly. The PMBOK guide really emphasizes that aligning with the principle of respect,
Okay.
it highlights the importance of fairness, transparency, and integrity throughout the entire process.
Okay.
This means treating all potential vendors with respect, avoiding conflicts of interest, and complying with all applicable laws and regulations.
So it's not just about what we do, but how we do it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the topic of risk management.
Okay.
Because no matter how well we plan, there are always potential risks in procurement.
Yeah, things happen.
Exactly.
So what are some of the common procurement risks
Okay.
that we should be aware of?
Well, one of the biggest risks is seller default.
Okay.
That's when the seller fails to deliver the goods or services as promised.
Oh, so they just say, nope, not going to do it.
Well, or they deliver them late
Okay.
or below the agreed upon quality standards.
So that would be a nightmare.
Yeah.
What can we do to like protect ourselves from that?
So careful vendor selection is key.
Okay.
Thoroughly vetting potential vendors, checking their references, and looking at their track record can help us identify vendors who are reliable and capable of meeting our needs.
So it's like doing your research.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We also need to have clear and comprehensive contracts in place that protect us
Okay.
in case of seller default.
So if they fail to deliver, you can go after them.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Another common risk is cost overruns.
Yeah.
This is when the actual cost of the procurement exceeds the initial budget.
And that happens for a lot of reasons.
Right, like unexpected price increases,
Yeah.
changes in scope, unforeseen delays.
Right. So how do we mitigate that?
To mitigate cost overruns, we need to have a solid cost management plan in place.
Okay.
Get accurate cost estimates up front and carefully monitor our spending throughout the procurement process.
So staying on top of it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then there's the risk of schedule delays,
Right.
which can have a ripple effect on the entire project timeline.
Like one thing gets delayed.
Yeah.
And then everything gets delayed.
Exactly. If one procurement gets delayed, it can push back other tasks and potentially jeopardize the project's overall completion date.
Right. So how do we avoid that?
To mitigate schedule delays, we need to have realistic delivery timelines.
Okay.
We need to closely track vendor progress and have contingency plans in place in case of unforeseen delays.
So a backup plan.
Exactly.
Okay. So all these risks, it can be a lot.
It can.
Are there any tools or techniques
There are.
that can help us, just navigate
Absolutely.
all of this?
The PMB About Guide provides a toolkit of procurement tools and techniques that can help us make better decisions,
Okay.
reduce risks, and improve the overall effectiveness of our procurement process.
Okay. Tell me more.
Okay, one helpful tool is the make-or-buy analysis.
Okay.
This is used to decide whether it's more cost-effective and efficient to procure something externally
Right.
or to produce it in-house using our own resources.
So, like, should we hire someone to do this or should we do it ourselves?
Exactly.
Okay.
And then we have independent cost estimates.
Okay.
These are used to get an objective assessment of the cost of the goods or services we're procuring.
So getting a second opinion.
Precisely.
Okay.
And then we have source selection criteria, which
Sure.
are the factors we'll use to evaluate potential vendors and choose the one that best meets our needs.
So it's like a checklist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where the principle of systems thinking is really important.
Okay.
We need to consider not just the individual vendor,
Right.
but how they fit into the overall project ecosystem.
So it's not just can they do the job, but how are they going to fit in with everybody else?
Precisely.
Yeah.
So these tools and techniques can really help us streamline the procurement process
Right.
and make more informed decisions.
So you've got our vendor, we've got our contract. We're using all these tools
Yes.
to manage the risks and keep everything on track.
Right.
The journey doesn't end there, though, right?
No, it doesn't. Once the contract is in motion,
Okay.
we enter the monitoring and controlling phase,
Okay.
which is all about ensuring that the vendor is delivering as promised
Right.
and that we're getting what we paid for.
Right. So keeping a watchful eye.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this involves things like tracking the vendor's progress against the agreed upon schedule,
Okay.
reviewing deliverables to ensure they meet quality standards,
Yeah.
managing payments, and addressing any issues that arise.
So a lot of communication and collaboration.
Precisely. And this is where the principle of continuous improvement is really important.
Okay.
We're not just checking boxes.
Right.
We're looking for ways to learn from each procurement
Yeah.
and make the next one even better.
Make it better next time.
Exactly.
Okay, so monitoring and controlling is just making sure everything's successful.
Yes.
And that you got what you wanted.
Exactly. And eventually, every procurement comes to an end.
Okay.
This is known as procurement closure.
Okay, so this is like wrapping it all up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Procurement closure involves things like Formally accepting the deliverables,
Right.
making final payments,
Right.
documenting lessons learned,
Right.
and archiving all the relevant documentation.
So dotting your I's and crossing your T's.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about bringing the procurement to a formal close,
Right.
ensuring that everything is properly documented, and capturing those valuable lessons learned for future procurements.
Okay, so we've covered a lot.
We have.
We've explored the procurement process, all the different roles,
Yeah.
the contract types, documentation, the risks,
Mm,
and what to do about the risks.
right.
Anything else our listeners should know?
I think it's important to emphasize that procurement is an ongoing process of learning and improvement.
Okay.
The PMBOK guide provides a great framework,
Yeah.
but it's just a starting point.
Okay.
You know?
Okay.
It's like learning to play a musical instrument.
Yeah, there you go.
You need to start with your basics, but
Right.
then you need to practice,
Right.
experiment, and find your own style.
The more you do it, the better you get at it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The more procurements you participate in, the more you'll learn about what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
You'll develop your own instincts and your own toolkit of strategies and techniques.
So it's a journey,
Precisely.
not a destination.
Exactly. And it's a journey that can be incredibly rewarding, both personally and professionally.
This has been an amazing overview of procurement.
It has.
I feel like I've learned so much. But before we go, I'm curious about something.
Okay.
We talked about the PMPOK guide and all its principles,
Right.
but you also mentioned agile practices earlier.
Yeah.
How do those fit into the procurement world?
That's a great question. And the answer is that agile principles and practices can be incredibly valuable in procurement,
Really?
especially in today's rapidly changing business environment.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
What kind of agile magic can we bring in?
Well, agile methodologies are all about flexibility, collaboration, and continuous improvement.
Okay,
And those values can be incredibly powerful in the procurement world.
so being nimble and adaptable.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Agile procurement emphasizes close collaboration between the buyer and seller,
okay,
frequent communication,
okay.
and a willingness to adjust plans as needed.
So instead of having like a set-in-stone plan,
Right.
you're able to,
Right. It's like turning that rigid procurement roadmap into a more flexible and responsive GPS system.
I like that.
Yeah.
And the beauty of agile is that it encourages you to constantly evaluate and improve your process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Learning from each experience and finding ways to work smarter.
So even in procurement, which seems very structured,
Yes.
there's still room to be a
Absolutely.
little agile.
Absolutely.
I love it. So this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Can you give me some specific examples
Sure.
of how agile can be used in procurement?
Of course. Let's start by looking at how agile can enhance the planning stage.
Okay.
Remember how we talked about the procurement management plan, that all-important roadmap?
Uh-huh.
Well, instead of creating a rigid upfront plan that tries to predict every detail,
Yeah.
an agile approach would advocate for a more iterative and flexible planning process.
So taking it one step at a time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We embrace the idea that things might change,
Right.
and we build that adaptability into our plan.
Yeah, because like you said, things are always changing.
Right.
Yeah.
And instead of lengthy, detailed bid documents,
Okay.
we might opt for shorter, more concise requests for information, or RFIs,
Okay.
to quickly gauge the market and gather insights from potential sellers.
So more agile and responsive in how you're getting information.
Exactly. And by collaborating closely with potential sellers early on,
Okay.
we can leverage their expertise and insights to shape our procurement approach.
So instead of them just being bidders, they're kind of like partners.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's a win-win for both sides.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, so that's in the planning stage. What about the conduct procurements, actually picking your seller? Can Agile help there?
Absolutely. Agile encourages shorter, more iterative selection cycles.
Okay.
Instead of lengthy formal evaluations, we might opt for a series of sprints
Okay.
where we work collaboratively with a smaller group of potential sellers to test their capabilities and refine our understanding of their solutions.
So it's like a mini audition to see who's going to fit the best.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It allows us to make more informed decisions and avoid those costly surprises later on.
Right, that makes sense. And then what about the control procurement? So that's the ongoing monitoring and
Right.
management?
Agile encourages regular feedback loops
Okay.
and close collaboration between the buyer and seller throughout the project lifecycle.
So it's not just checking in every once in a while. It's like constant communication.
Precisely.
Okay.
And instead of relying solely on formal reports and documentation,
Right.
we might opt for more visual and interactive ways to track progress and communicate information, such as Kanban boards or online dashboards.
So everybody knows what's going on. Yeah.
Exactly. And by embracing those agile principles of continuous improvement,
Right.
we can constantly look for ways to optimize our procurement processes, making them more efficient, more collaborative, and more responsive to change.
This has been amazing. I never thought I'd be so excited about procurement.
Yeah, it's cool stuff.
It seems like Agile can really transform this process
You can.
from something that people might dread
Right.
into something that's actually dynamic and fun, and you can get a lot out of it.
Exactly. And the best part is that you don't have to choose between traditional procurement and agile.
Right?
You can blend the best of both worlds,
Yeah.
tailoring your approach to fit the specific needs of your project and organization.
To kind of make it your own.
Precisely.
Yeah, I love that. This has been such an insightful deep dive.
It has.
But before we go, what's one thing, one key takeaway
Okay.
that our listener can apply right away
All right.
to make their procurement process a little more agile?
That's a great question. I think the most important thing is to start embracing the idea of collaboration.
Okay.
Procurement is not a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
It's not about squeezing the seller for the lowest possible price.
Right. It's about working together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Reach out to potential sellers early on.
Okay.
Involve them in the planning process and be open to their ideas and insights.
Turning into allies.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And you'll be amazed at the creative solutions and win-win outcomes that emerge when you foster that spirit of collaboration.
This has been an amazing journey through the world of procurement. We started with that traditional PMP guide framework.
Right.
We explored the key processes.
Yes.
And then we even added some agile magic
Yes.
to make it even more dynamic and adaptable.
It's been a fascinating exploration of how seemingly different approaches can actually complement each other.
Right?
And now let's delve into some real-world examples that bring these concepts to life.
I'm ready for some stories. Give me those procurement triumphs
Yeah.
and those, cautionary tales that make you go, oh no, what were they thinking?
Okay, here's one that highlights the importance of planning and risk management.
Okay.
Imagine a large construction project,
Okay.
let's say a new bridge being built.
Okay, I can picture it.
Okay,
Huge scale, lots of moving parts, big budget.
lots of suppliers.
Yeah.
Now imagine that the team responsible for procuring the steel girders for the bridge underestimated the lead time
Oh,
for manufacturing and deliver.
that's not good.
Well, construction was already underway,
Right.
and the site was ready for those girders,
Okay.
but they arrived months behind schedule,
Oh no.
throwing the whole project timeline into disarray.
I bet that wasn't cheap.
You're right, the delays resulted in significant cost overruns.
Yeah.
Construction crews were idle,
Right?
penalties were incurred,
Yeah.
and the project's overall budget took a major hit.
So they probably wish they'd done a little more planning.
Absolutely. A
Well-
well-defined plan with realistic timelines and a thorough risk assessment
Right.
could have prevented this disaster.
Okay, so that's a fail. Give me a win.
All right, how about this? A healthcare organization was looking to implement a new electronic health record system.
Okay.
Right.
Major undertaking.
Major undertaking first.
Sensitive data.
Yeah, and you got to make sure it works with all the other systems.
Exactly. And they knew that choosing the right vendor was critical.
Right.
So instead of just sending out a standard RFP and hoping for the best,
Okay.
they took a more collaborative approach,
Okay.
embracing some of those agile principles we discussed earlier.
Okay, tell me more.
They shortlisted a few potential vendors
Okay.
and invited them to participate in a series of workshops and demonstrations.
So they got them involved early.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that they could, really understand the organization's needs
Right.
and tailor their solutions accordingly.
And by working with the vendors, they were able to
Make a more informed decision.
Right.
Choosing a system that not only met their technical requirements, but also aligned with their culture and long-term goals. So that avoided a lot of problems, I bet.
They did, and the implementation went smoothly.
Yeah.
Thanks in part to the strong relationship they had built with the vendor during the procurement process.
So it was a win-win.
Exactly. And it highlights the principle of stakeholder engagement.
Okay.
By understanding the needs and perspectives of all involved,
Right.
you can achieve better outcomes.
Okay, one more story
Okay.
before we wrap up.
Right.
Give me a cautionary tale
Okay.
that shows why the legal and ethical considerations are so important.
All right, here's one that unfortunately happens more often than you might think.
Okay?
A government agency was tasked with procuring new laptops for their employees.
Okay.
Sounds straightforward enough.
Yeah.
It should have been.
Okay.
But one of the decision makers on the selection committee
Okay.
had a personal connection with a particular vendor.
Conflict of interest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Despite other vendors offering more competitive solutions.
Okay.
This decision maker used their influence to steer the contract towards their friend's company.
So they were not being ethical.
Right.
Yeah.
And in this case, the decision maker's actions were eventually discovered,
Oh.
leading to a scandal that damaged the agency's reputation and resulted in legal consequences.
So that shows that you can't put your personal interest above
Exactly.
the good of the agency or the organization or whatever.
Integrity and transparency are crucial.
Yeah.
The principle of fairness should guide every decision.
Okay.
Remember, procurement is all about making responsible and ethical decisions that benefit the project and the organization as a whole.
Okay, so we've explored some real-world examples, the good and the bad.
We have.
And it's clear that procurement is this complex process
Yeah.
with a lot of moving parts, lots of potential pitfalls.
Yeah.
But when done right, it can be a really powerful thing.
Absolutely.
For any organization.
For sure.
Yeah. So what's like one final takeaway that our listeners can take with them?
I would say this. Don't be afraid to ask questions,
Okay.
to challenge assumptions,
Yeah.
and to continuously learn and improve.
Okay.
Procurement is not a static field.
Right.
It's constantly evolving,
Yeah.
you know?
So always be learning.
Precisely. And by doing so, you'll not only become a more effective procurement professional,
Right.
but you'll also contribute to building a more ethical,
Right.
transparent, and ultimately successful procurement ecosystem.
That's a fantastic note to end on.
It is.
This has been incredible. I feel like we've really covered it all.
We have.
From the basics to the contract types, risk management, and even how to bring in that agile magic.
Agile.
Yeah.
It's been my pleasure sharing this journey with you.
It's been a pleasure having you.
I hope our listeners feel empowered to navigate the complexities of procurement with confidence and a commitment to ethical practice.
And on that note, we will bring this deep dive to a close. Thanks for joining us. We started with that traditional PMBOK guide framework.
Right.
We explored the key processes,
Yes.
and then we even added some, like, agile magic
Yes.
to make it even more dynamic and adaptable.
It's been a fascinating exploration of how seemingly different approaches can actually complement each other.
Right.
And now let's delve into some real-world examples
Okay.
that bring these concepts to life.
I'm ready for some stories. Give me those procurement triumphs and those, cautionary tales that make you go, oh no, what were they thinking?
Okay, here's one that highlights the importance of planning and risk management.
Okay.
Imagine a large construction project,
Okay.
let's say a new bridge being built.
Okay. I can picture it.
Okay.
Huge scale, lots of moving parts, big budgets.
Lots of suppliers.
Yeah.
Now imagine that the team responsible for procuring the steel girders for the bridge underestimated the lead time
Oh,
for manufacturing and delivery.
that's not good.
Well, construction was already underway,
Right.
and the site was ready for those girders,
Okay.
but they arrived months behind schedule,
Oh no.
throwing the whole project timeline into disarray.
I bet that wasn't cheap.
You're right. The delays resulted in significant cost overruns.
Yeah.
Construction crews were idle.
Right.
Penalties were incurred.
Yeah.
And the project's overall budget took a major hit.
So they probably wish they'd done a little more planning
Absolutely.
up front.
A well-defined plan with realistic timelines with a thorough risk assessment
Right.
could have prevented this disaster.
Okay, so that's a fail. Give me a win.
All right, how about this? A healthcare organization was looking to implement a new electronic health record system.
Okay. Major undertaking.
Major undertaking, for sure.
Yeah, lots of...
Sensitive data.
Yeah, and you got to make sure it works with all the other systems.
Exactly. And they knew that choosing the right vendor was critical.
Right.
So instead of just sending out a standard RFP and hoping for the best,
Okay.
they took a more collaborative approach,
Okay.
embracing some of those agile principles we discussed earlier.
Okay, tell me more.
They shortlisted a few potential vendors
Okay.
and invited them to participate in a series of workshops and demonstrations.
So they got them involved early.
Exactly, so that they could, really understand the organization's needs
Right.
and tailor their solutions accordingly.
And by working with the vendors, they were able to...
Make a more informed decision.
Right.
Choosing a system that not only met their technical requirements, but also aligned with their culture and long-term goals.
So that avoided a lot of problems, I bet.
They did, and the implementation went smoothly,
Yeah.
thanks in part to the strong relationship they had built with the vendor during the procurement process.
So it was a win-win.
Exactly, and it highlights the principle of stakeholder engagement.
Okay.
By understanding the needs and perspectives of all involved,
Right.
you can achieve better outcomes.
Okay, one more story
Okay.
before we wrap up.
All right.
Give me a cautionary tale
Okay.
that shows why the legal and ethical considerations are so important.
All right, here's one that unfortunately happens more often than you might think.
Okay.
A government agency was tasked with procuring new laptops for their employees.
Okay.
Sounds straightforward enough.
Yeah.
It should have been.
Okay.
But one of the decision makers on the selection committee
Okay.
had a personal connection with a particular vendor.
Oh, conflict of interest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Despite other vendors offering more competitive solutions,
Okay.
this decision maker used their influence to steer the contract towards their friend's company.
So they were not being ethical.
Right.
Yeah.
And in this case, the decision maker's actions were eventually discovered,
Uh-oh.
leading to a scandal
Oh, dude.
that damaged the agency's reputation and resulted in legal consequences.
So that shows that you can't, you can't put your personal interest above the
Exactly.
good of the agency or the organization or like.
Integrity and transparency are
Yeah.
crucial.
Yeah.
The principle of fairness should guide every decision. Remember, procurement is all about making responsible and ethical decisions that benefit the project and the organization as a whole.
Okay, so we've explored some real-world examples, the good and the bad.
We have.
And it's clear that procurement is this complex process
Yeah.
with a lot of moving parts, a lot of potential pitfalls.
Yeah.
But when done right, it can be a really powerful thing
Absolutely.
for any organization.
For sure.
Yeah. So what's like one final takeaway that our listeners can
Okay.
take with them?
I would say this. Don't be afraid to ask questions,
Okay.
to challenge assumptions,
Yeah.
and to continuously learn and improve.
Okay.
Procurement is not a static field.
Right.
It's constantly evolving.
Yeah. So always be learning.
Precisely. And by doing so, you'll not only become a more effective procurement professional,
Right.
but you'll also contribute to building a more ethical,
Right.
transparent, and ultimately successful procurement ecosystem.
That's a fantastic note to end on.
It is.
This has been incredible. I feel like we've really covered it all.
We have.
From basics to the contract types, risk management,
Uh-huh.
and even how to bring in that agile magic.
Agile.
Yeah.
It's been my pleasure sharing this journey with you.
It's been a pleasure having you.
I hope our listeners feel empowered to navigate the complexities of procurement with confidence and a commitment to ethical practice.
And on that note, we will bring this deep dive to a close. Thanks for joining us.